How's everybody doing? In today's video I'm going to be answering the question, is it worth buying a $2,000 amp, or is it worth spending a lot of money on gear in general? But right now we're going to look at it in the context of an amp. Now, as many of you guys are watching this already know, when it comes to guitar amps you could either spend $100 or you could spend a few thousand. Amps that are on the cheaper side tend to be solid state circuitry, which has basically very few mechanical parts to it. It's just a flat circuit, and they are mass produced, so that keeps the cost low. Whereas amps that are thousands of dollars typically are tube amps, which cost a little bit more in parts, and they are amps that are usually built by hand in a country where the labor cost is very high. So you might have Marshall amps built in the UK by hand, which is going to cost a lot in labor, or you might have like a Mesa amp built in the US by hand, which is going to cost a lot of labor. Again, it's going to drive the cost of the amp up to several $1,000s. Now, I've personally been going through kind of a tone search over the last couple of years. I feel like I'm very happy with where I am now, and I can now reflect and kind of make this video and explain kind of my thoughts on the process. But basically, as a musician, when you're looking for a certain tone, you're probably going to find yourself buying and going through multiple instruments and the peripheral things like with guitar, pedals, amps, other pieces of gear. And I've done that, and I went through a lot of different guitars and a handful of different amps over the last few years. And part of it is kind of that it's natural just to work your way up once you test the waters of a certain thing. Like for me, a big step was to buy my first tube amp, period, which I got a couple of years ago. That was a Bugera 333 2x12 combo, and that amp was about $500, and I upgraded the tubes and I upgraded the speakers, and it actually sounds pretty good. I used that amp for a while. I still have it, although I don't really use it nearly as much anymore. And then I realized that there was something more to be had as far as the depth or complexity of tone, and I realized that while I had a good sounding amp, it wasn't as good as it could sound, so I wanted to improve my rig. Now, as most guitarists do, I based my dream amp sound on amps that I'd heard other artists playing over the years, and for me the big two were a Mesa triple rectifier or a Marshall JVM. And ultimately I ended up buying a JVM, and I didn't spend a ton on it, but it's still a JVM. You're not going to really find one that's cheap. What sold me on the JVM was the tone of it and nothing else. There are several guitarists who I'm a fan of who have used JVMs over the years, and whenever they have, I've liked the sound. I've distinctly thought, that's a great guitar tone, what is that? And I've found out, oh, it's a Marshall JVM. It's a really versatile amp. I think when you're talking about a Marshall that's built in the UK, a JVM is extremely good value for money. So for the features it has, for the versatility it has, the number of different gain stages on each channel is very useful. I just couldn't pass it up, and the fact that there's nothing else that sounds like that. And that's the main point that I wanted to address with this video, is simply that if you want a certain sound that you know a certain piece of gear will provide, that's the only piece of gear that will give you that sound. Now, I wasn't necessarily doing this when I bought the handful of amps that I did in the number of years leading up to me finally buying a JVM, which is the last amp that I've bought in terms of timeline. But I know a lot of guitarists consciously believe that if you're looking to get a certain sound, you can get the sound by buying something that's typically cheaper and then improvising. And while you can buy certain things and come close to getting a certain sound, the fact is you're never going to have that exact sound. You could buy a cheaper amp that's still a tube amp, and you could buy a pedal that specifically makes it where it's supposed to sound like it's a certain brand, and you can run that and it'll sound close, but it's not going to sound exactly like what you're looking to sound like. And for me as an artist, I can't really picture sacrificing on a tool that I need to create my art. So like, when it comes down to it, my belief is that if you need to get a certain sound to fill what you're looking to fill artistically, then you just need to get that sound. And as long as buying a certain guitar or buying a certain amp is not going to prevent you from eating, then at least for me, from an artistic standpoint, you have to just do it. And the price of a lot of things, especially music gear that has a great reputation and is of pretty high quality construction, the price tends to really suck. I mean, there's really no glory in saying that you spent a certain amount of money. In fact, it's actually kind of sad that you had to part with so much money to get what you're looking for your art. I know for me personally as an artist, I hold the tone of my music, even if I'm just practicing, or especially if I'm just practicing, I hold the tone that I'm getting to the highest level you can imagine. And for me, the sound of hearing my own guitar coming through my amp has to be so good that it drives me to pick it up and play it. There's a certain joy that I get out of just listening to my tone and hearing that everything's good, and it can't be compared to anything else. The other thing is, if you don't necessarily have the money, or if it's going to be tight, or it's not a wise decision to buy something, and you're thinking, I'll just spend some more money from where I am and I'll come close, I would almost advise you to just, as long as you have a setup that works and that isn't completely awful, I would advise you to probably just save up for that thing that you want if you have the idea of it in mind already. So rather than buying, an upgrade for an amp, but it's not all the way to what you want, I would say probably just wait, save up, and buy what you want. Because you're going to in the end, and you would have wasted your money in the interim. As always, thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to share it and subscribe. Hopefully my opinion on this and my experience over the last couple of years of buying and going through a lot of gear has provided some insight to some of you watching. That's just what I found to be the case, just of how important tone is. And yeah, if you have a different opinion, feel free to leave a comment below and we can discuss. Thank you.